Hi, I'm Gary Jublin. As a subscriber, you're listening to the latest episode of I Catch Killers before anyone else. Thanks for taking out the subscription. Enjoy this episode of the podcast first. Welcome back to part 2 of Mark Zjedlar on I Catch Killers. Mark is now going to take us into the world of the homicide detective and working in the child abuse squad. We'll give you an understanding of the impact it can have on you as a person and those around you working in those areas. He'll talk about the suicide of some colleagues and how that changed his perspective on things. Welcome back to part 2 of I Catch Killers with our guest Mark Zjedlar. Mark, I want to start talking about homicide, how you got into homicide. So what stage of your career was it that you went to the homicide squad?
Yeah, so I'd been at Southeast Asian organised crime, and we actually started through an informant, basically investigated some old homicides, and they were jobs that Homicide had run, and we ended up getting charging people for that. One of the murders, and there was another murder where there were some people who hadn't been identified that we ran through, and it was with Brian O'Donoghue, which was he also went to Homicide, kind of on the back of this job.
And that was when you were working out of Southeast Asian crime.
Yeah, that's right. So and I think Mick Ashwood was heavily involved in both those jobs, and on the back of that, when a job came up at Homicide, he kind of said, "You guys
gave you a tap on the shoulder
and said, look, you guys should
put
apply."
your application in."
And so that's how I got across.
Okay. Just, you mentioned informants, and I always find that fascinating because every detective's got an informant story. Yeah. And I know in your career you've dealt with a lot of informants. Is there anyone that stands out, a particular informant? And just
Yeah, well, this particular job, and we've got I guess these guys are still out there, so be careful what I say.
We'll hide their identity.
But we met this particular guy he'd been involved in an incident at a hotel where, when I met him, he had been attacked by another gang. His intestines were all over the floor.
So is that
this
when
is
you
this is my introduction to him, right? So,
with his intestines over the floor?
I remember distinctly. There's the one of the security guards has got the filthy old bar rag, and he's holding that to push his guts back in him. And anyway, that particular guy we work with, and he gave us some information about. He was involved in an unsolved murder. He was actually one of the perpetrators, and so we was kind of speaking to him one day at the station, and he said, "Do you know about? I know some information about a murder." And he started talking, and then we realised, hang on, you are the the murderer, because when someone just starts, and I didn't know anything about it. It had happened 4 years prior, so it was kind of not around my time when I was working in the detectives then, so I didn't know exactly.
So when you saw him with his
with that I was in the detectives,
right.
But the murder he started telling us about,
you weren't familiar.
I had no
with
idea about it. So, which is probably a good way to interview someone, actually.
Yeah, well, it keeps it sanitised, doesn't it?
Yeah, because you don't know anything about the crime, so you just go, well, what happened then? What happened then? Tell me more about that, because I basically had no idea. I was with Brian O'Donoghue, and he gave us information about his involvement and others in that murder, and as a result of that, we work with him. We got some advice to allow him to be at large, and he was helping in relation to that. And a lot of this is public record, because he ended up fighting the charge, even though he'd made full admissions. And
so you're running him as an informant on a murder that he's told you about.
That's right, yeah.
And he's the one
that has done the murder.
Right.
But there's other people still involved, and then there was another murder that happened 7 days. It was either prior or after that particular murder, where one person was charged, but there was a number of others involved. And this was of a young 16-year-old that had been kidnapped, tortured, and basically had his throat cut, dumped at a building site in Chester Hill. And So he kind of worked with us to, when we scooped up a number of, it was 4 involved in each murder. So we got eight accused for 2 different murder trials. And that was kind of the information he gave us, and implicated himself.
What was his motive?
His motivation, it was like this particular incident where he's been stabbed, it was like he had an epiphany that he needed to,
dare I say, he found God or something?
I don't think it was
those...
that. I don't think it was. I think he thought he was going to die. He kind of wasn't going to long for this world. I think he knew that. So this was the thing. He'd started talking in a way that, well, like, is this bloke all there? Because I know he's a bad guy, and I know he's been involved in a number of things. He'd been shot and stabbed, and he was only 21 at the time. So he had the runs on the board that he wasn't lying.
Yeah.
But you got to test, is he telling us the truth? Yeah. And he was. There was nothing he said that wasn't factual, and it all checked out. Yeah, he basically gave up all these people, and he also tipped us into another solicit to murder that was going to happen, that he got information about, which involved a pretty heavy Lebanese underworld figure.
So when you said you had him out there, like you let him run, how often were you in contact with him?
Daily.
Yeah.
My wife would answer the phone at night, and he'd be ringing at 3 a.m, just bored, want to chat to you.
What is it about informants?
Yeah.
I found out with informants, you get them in, you build that rapport, but then you become responsible for their life.
Yeah, and he got really excited. They get quite excited about, maybe we could use this to get information. They become pseudo-detective.
I think that's part of that. And I've often looked at this, and I see it with organised crime informants and different things. They like to be part of something. They become part of our gang, which is the police gang, and genuinely are trying to help and get invested in getting a result.
Yeah. Well, one day, and this is, he knew, because he had wide-reaching kind of connections. One day he rings me up and says, if something really bad was going to happen, could you do something about it? And I'm like, well, yeah. What is it? Oh, don't know yet. I'm working on it. Okay.
That's always a worry when an informant tells you he's working on something.
Anyway, keeps kind of touching base. He's really cagey about what he's telling us. And then we get him, have a face-to-face, and we're going through, what are you talking about? He goes, oh, well, this Crown witness is actually Bassem Hemsey, who was a pretty infamous crook, was on remand for the murder of a there was a Crown witness that was going to give evidence against him, and he'd approached our informant to murder this guy. So this is the credibility he had.
Yeah.
He was known to, do that kind of badness.
He'd be a contract killer.
And we're saying,
basically.
Right, so what has transpired? And he said, well, what, they're going to pay me this. We've already organised the gun. I've already been in a drive-by with him. He'd gone. There was all these stages of planning and preparation.
Now I'm looking at it from a detective's point of view. At this point in time, you're starting to get concerned about managing this.
I remember Andy Day and Paul Phillips were our inspectors, and we're on the phone to them, and we're going, well, we got this. This is what he's told us, and they're like, Slim was Paul Phillips' nickname, and Paul Phillips, he's like, oh dear, oh God. He's never really lost his cool, but he'd just be like,
that means fuck.
And what? And we went, well, this is this guy. He's very loose, but everything he says is right. Like he's not a bullshitter. This is so. In the end, the guys that had originally, and they were from East Coast, and they came across. We did kind of a combined job with them and substituted in a UC. Yeah. And he was going to do the hit and pulled our guy out of it, and in the end they captured the evidence to
got
get
the results.
For a solicited murder. Yeah. But the thing was too, we had to say, once someone's engaged him, you got to say, yeah, you'll do it, because if not, it goes out to market, and then you don't have control.
That's the thing, and that's interesting you should say that, because I don't think a lot of people would see that, because you can't just say, no, don't do that, because they're still going to try and get this person killed.
Yeah, and I remember, that was...
So there's a pressure there that you can't just discard it. You got to run with it, deal with it, and get a result.
Yeah. So that was... it was pretty... But this guy he had that kind of credibility, and that this kind of stuff was happening. So running him was very interesting.
Did it cause drama at homes of the 3 a.m. phone calls?
Oh, look, it did, and and a lot of calls. My wife's come up on a lot of different intercepts, because I'm like, so half the time you're answering the phone, you're probably going to be recorded, because of the stuff we had going on, and I'll just explain it. This guy's like, he's a bit lost, because he had a gang, and now where he's gang.
That's exactly right. That's what I'm talking about. But I know my kids grew up on an informant. I obviously won't say his name, but they were fascinated by him. And every time, is that the informant? Because he'd be phoning all the time, and they'd hear the conversations and just think, what the hell is going on here?
Yeah.
But it's an interesting relationship. It's very taxing, isn't it?
Oh,
it's not a 9 to 5. If you've got an informant and you're running a red hot informant, you've got to invest, and you can't bullshit them too. There's a degree of trust, and it's a delicate balance.
And as soon as you are not there for them, that it's because he's putting himself out there, massively. Like, he's at risk, and if we're not there, 24/7, ready to kind of respond, then he'll walk. And
that's right. I'm still getting calls, and last call I had a couple of days, or last contact from an informant, and he knows I'm out of the cops, but still is contacting me on wanting to check on stuff. So it's that relationship that you get with them, that it's built on a degree of trust.
Yeah, I had a guy ring me only just before I left the cops, who was involved with a Middle Eastern organised crime, and he's ringing me asking advice, and he'd ring for the most bizarre reason. He ended up doing the dirty on us, like didn't give evidence, and then went missing, and he'd ring when he wanted something, basically. But it turned out he just bashed and sexually assaulted his wife, and he was kind of ringing me, trying to get... So I straight away rang the local detectives and got him arrested.
Yeah.
But he still thought that he could reach out,
you've got to keep a really strong moral compass when you deal with them, haven't you? Because you get that relationship happening, but they want a little bit more, and you've got to push back, and you've got to be strong.
Yeah, and this particular guy was it was all to get some, and a lot of them you can't trust.
Yeah.
Whereas this particular Southeast Asian informant that we had was... It was very rare that he provided information that wasn't 100% accurate. And so, there was that kind of element of trust both ways. But, you always got to be on your toes. And you always got to anticipate that they're committing crime in the background.
Yeah.
And
well, it's a bit naive if you think it's just completely changed. And they've...
Yeah, that's right. So it's a fine kind of line to walk. But... as anyone who followed the Royal Commission would know that, back in the 90s, that's how a lot of police came
unstuck. And the protections they're put in place, I think they're a good thing. And that you're accountable. And so it's not like the old days where you just say, I'm ducking out to see an informant, and that was all you had to say.
Yeah, and in that one too, with this particular Southeast. Inspectors were heavily involved. Paul Jones was our boss. He was heavily involved. So it was like they were kind of, it was pretty high-level stuff he was giving us. So it wasn't just us holding that because of the risks involved. It was pretty big. But, there has been other times where you kind of, doing your best with these guys that are basically trying to use you to get...
you've got to be careful with it. Well, look, I think you've demonstrated you've got enough experience investigating murders and homicides, so we then decided to invite you to the Homicide Squad.
Yeah.
So you've paid your dues in Southeast Asian crime and Cabramatta, and you've come to Homicide. So what was your impressions of coming into Homicide?
Yeah, so I turned up, and I remember the first week And there's always someone's got a court matter on a job, and they're asking for people on call. So I put my hand, I'm the young bloke, and new bloke, I'll go on call. And first call I get, Matt Moss rings me, and lovely bloke, Matt, but he's old school.
Yeah.
And his first words are to me, "We got a job? Go do a piss. I'll ring you back in 5 minutes." I went, okay, I better do a piss then, because that's what he's told me to do.
Mossy, love him, but yeah, old school.
Yeah, very old school. Used to sport the shoulder holster. He loved it.
Yeah.
But anyway, so that was the kind of the first week, and went to a job at Sefton Hotel, which was a murder of Dimitri DeBaz, which was turned into a really big job that kind of got stuck on that for a long time. So I guess that was kind of and when I was called out, Ange Molo was the sergeant, but he was leaving that week. I think it was his last week.
Yeah, that's right. I remember that.
So yeah, I stayed on that job, which turned into, there was one guy shot, another bloke injured, and that turned into that was probably my first working on Middle Eastern organised crime. Which is a real cultural shift from working on Southeast Asian.
It's interesting because you've got that insight of specialising in Southeast Asian crime and then going to Middle Eastern crime. What differences did you find?
Oh, just Southeast Asian organised crime. I'd never felt threatened in terms of when I go to arrest someone that, my life's on the line.
Yeah.
I mean, potentially it was, but you always got to be on your toes. But we were more seen as an inconvenience to
disrupting the Southeast Asian crime.
That's right. Like there was no advantage in them fighting with the cops. It was bad for their business. They may intimidate, harass witnesses or that down the track, but with the police, there's just no point fighting with us.
Well, they wanted to basically go under the radar.
That's right.
Yeah.
And so when you switch into the Middle Eastern organised crime, culturally, it's very different. It's all about face and bravado, and even to arrest someone for a very minor crime, you might have to go with your whole squad. Whereas Southeast Asian, we were arresting people for murder and just you and your partner. It wasn't, you never predicted there was going to be a big incident. Whereas that job, they were very volatile. And in fact, there was a bit of a crossing paths with some of these guys because there were the Assyrian kings, and some of them were the same people that came up in the Dave Carty murder.
Right.
So, that kind of, there was that crossover. You go, hang on, they were suspects in that, or they were involved in some way or on the periphery.
Yeah.
So working on that, I mean, to just give you an indication, we had a committal hearing. We charged one of the guys involved with the Dimitri DeBaz murder, and inside the actual courthouse at Central Local Court, there was an all-in brawl between the two families. It's just we had armed police, riot police there the whole duration of the committal.
Because the families just went, the victim and the offender, or victim's family and the offender's family, just came to blows.
Yeah, and there was just it's a big difference working on that, and so you actually start to really then be concerned about, what's in my name? What's my license address? Am I on the electoral roll? And you have to really start thinking about changing all that up and making sure that you can't be identified or can't be tracked down, because it's really nothing for them to intimidate police or.
So with Homicide, you've had the taste of Southeast Asian, you've had Middle Eastern crime, other type of murders that you did in Homicide that come to mind?
Yeah, probably the on-call weekend from hell I had once. We went up to, so we got called up to Shake and Baby murder, and that's one thing I'll explain a bit about the Shake and Baby.
I think we should, because people wouldn't understand.
So Andy Waterman, who was another one of our colleagues, he's been
another mentor of mine.
And he pretty much wrote the book on the Shake and Baby investigation. And if you see him, actually, it's quite a sight when you see him get the doll and shake a baby,
trying to show us. I remember,
and it's to demonstrate it's not, because people would think a shaken baby. Someone shakes but they're shaking that violently. Often you'll get rib fractures where they've gripped them, and you get fractures in the extremities. So it's common to get fractured wrists, fractured ankles.
Yeah.
So they're that violently shaken.
It's a horrible subject, and I think it shocks us all, when a baby's being killed. But what we're talking about here, shaken baby, is, and what Andy was demonstrating to us when he was upskilling us on it, was the amount of violence.
Yeah,
taken.
it's the velocity in which they are shaken back and forth is that the brain bounces around inside the skull, and they basically kind of bleed out through hemorrhaging and swelling on the brain and die. And those other telltale marks, just in terms of fractures of ankles, wrists, broken ribs, show the extreme kind of nature of that.
Yeah.
So we've called up to a job up at Dubbo where suspected shaken baby death, and I've gone with Erin Lowry and Sharon Butterfield. I was the team leader, and we're on our way up, and there's a murder of another person who was admitted into mental health and kind of left to their own volition, and they murdered their friend on the side of the highway.
So, and just to set the scene here so people understand, we work in Sydney at Homicide. We're based in Sydney. When you're on call, and it was basically once every 6 weeks, sort of minimum, occasionally more often. But if a murder happened, you would get called and you would respond. And you were on your way up to the shaken baby murder at Dubbo, and on your way up there was a call of another murder.
Another homicide that happened just outside of Dubbo. So, so we turn up and help them. It was a local job being run, but you help them with the initial response to that. Next day, tidy up the tail end of that. Like I said, they were running that, but get onto the investigation, trying to track down these parents who are drug addicts and hard to locate. And at this stage, we've probably arrived and haven't really slept going into the next day because we've responded to another murder. We start responding to this. We get 2 days into the investigation of shaken baby death, and as you well know, that you're trying to do as much as possible in those first 72 hours, and we've already been kind of missed some time because we've had to divert our attention to something else.
And you're also ducking home to pack your gear, grab your bags, driving 6 hours up to Dubbo or however long it takes.
That's right. Yep. So we get involved in that, end up tracking down the parents and interviewing them. And I'm finally get back to a hotel room where we've had a night where we can probably knock off at a reasonable time, refresh to come back.
So you've been at it for about 3 days?
Yep, been about 3 days. Mick Willing was the crime manager there actually at the time.
At Dubbo.
So he's made a call. Look, I've got a siege, got 1 dead and 1 injured. And I honestly thought he was taking the piss. I actually, when I ended the phone call with him, I went and spoke to Erin. I said, because she'd been rung also. And it's a
surely
bit of a
not.
sick joke. Come on, we're a bit tired. I thought maybe because it was already made a bit of a thing of, geez, you turn up here and you bring the murder with you, basically. Yeah. So for this to happen, I was like, is he making this up? No, he wasn't making it up. It was a pretty live situation. So we go in and at this stage we've still got the farmers. So what had happened, there was an ongoing dispute between a manager of a farm and the landowner. And the landowner said, look, once you're off the property, there was something to do with, it was civil, basically. Yeah. He was standing his ground, the manager, and saying, look, I've got rights to stay here under my tenancy. And the landowner wanted him gone, and the police had been involved, and they'd even got legal advice and said, there's nothing, it's a civil matter, it needs to be worked out. It's a kind of a tenancy tribunal type of arrangement. So the landowner's going, right, well, he may have rights to the house, but I own the rest of the property. So he's got some heavy guys from Melbourne to come down and just camp there. And they were just harassing him, cutting electricity, putting holes in the tanks in the middle of the night, banging through banging on the window, ongoing harassment.
It's building up.
Yeah, building up. He snaps, comes out, just starts opening fire, hits one, kills one, and he injures another. And at this stage, you've got they've taken the injured bloke away. There's a dead body there, and there's the manager in the house with his family and a firearm. So, so we're coordinating, the negotiators, flying up the SPG.
3 days, not much sleep, and then. And what time did you get notified about that?
That would have been at about 10 or 11 at night.
I hate those calls at that time.
Just
when you're about to go to sleep.
Yeah. There's you've not refreshed at all. Yeah. And you're responding to that. We were lucky enough, though, at that point that might have been, I think it was Paul Jones at the time had kind of identified, I need to send another team up. This is getting ridiculous. So we kind of managed it to a point. And I think Joey Cassett turned up with another team, and they kind of, because we still hadn't finished the investigation into Shake and Bake. Yeah. In the interim, before they arrived, the manager had handed himself in, basically dropped the weapon, and that was all contained.
I think what you described there, and I don't think there's anyone that's worked homicide that hasn't experienced weekends like that, whether it's in a country town or in Sydney where you're just going from one murder to another. And how taxing it is. And I don't think the audience are really aware of how long you can actually stay awake for because the adrenaline's running and you might do 2 days and you literally do not sleep.
Yeah, I don't think. I mean, we were there for probably 5 days and didn't, we would have slept at some point.
Yeah,
but
grab an hour here or there. Yeah, so the experience you had at Dubbo, it's not unusual. We all spend some time in homicide and you get those type of weekends or weeks where you get flogged. So you got back from Dubbo?
Yeah, so I actually remember distinctly coming back from Dubbo because, one was, I said to the team, I was in one car, they were in the other, and I said, basically turn your phones off, drive, don't stop, kind of ingest, but yeah, it was kind of, we need to get out of here. And but I do remember I turned back up to the office and Steve Leach was there. And so Steve had been off for a little while on a HAD.
Steve Leach was I'll just clarify who Steve Leach is, a detective sergeant at Homicide, well liked, and he was just one of those gregarious type human beings that you just felt, he was like that, and I don't know if he's properly represented, but that uncle, that person you could rely on, he was just so dependable and just so capable at the work that he was doing. And he was on your team?
He was, yeah. Yep. One thing I always... so he'd been in Homicide a long time and then went over to The Hague.
Yeah.
He was investigating Kosovo war crimes in the early stages, so that's where they were exhuming mass graves.
Yeah, it was fairly intense, his time over there.
And but he... And again, working with him, going out on call, you could see he really relished dealing with young detectives.
Yeah,
and he was so encouraging, and just he's a big man. Like would have been 6'5", big bear of a real man. Yeah, gentle guy, and very approachable, encouraging, and anyway, so he had gone off. And he'd been in a car accident in his early days, and that was kind of playing up. And I think it is about, as happens, it's probably about time I'm done. But he was back in the office that particular day, and doing a statement. And I remember I hadn't seen him for a while, but I was, as I've gone through, I was completely flogged at this point.
Yeah,
dropped some gear back in the office, and I had to go. And I kind of said, "Look, love to stay and chat, but I just got to get home and go to bed." And it turned out that particular day, and again, it's a bit of a measure of the bloke, he was there tidying things up. He'd worked out that his gun access had still worked to get into the gun room. It was only a week or so later, returned to state crime, went into the gun room and committed suicide with his firearm.
Yeah, I remember.
Yeah, and you always reflect on your last moments that you spend with someone who... that happens to, and it's look, and there was no real warning signs either.
No, I think we all felt somewhat guilty about it, that no one saw it. Yeah. No one saw it coming. And when he did kill himself, and it was in our environment, it was down in our gun lockers, and it was just such a. I was away at the time. I was up, I think, an inquest up on the North Coast, and heard about it. I just couldn't believe it. But that's I understand what you're saying. You must feel that you could have spoken to him. Whether that would have made a difference, who knows?
Yeah, I've still got it, Amy, because I'm into surfing, and he'd given me an old Mark Richards board that he had.
Yeah.
So I've kind of got that memory of him, and I actually remember at his funeral, I offered it back to his sons. I said, "Look, he gave it to you.
Yeah.
He wanted you to have it."
Yeah.
But and again, no real. Yeah, it's probably the years of seeing a lot of trauma and the stuff. I don't know the stuff over the Hague.
I know he saw some tough stuff over there, and I think he was on the Ivan Milat thing as well. But who knows what the trigger is? But I think it brought it all home to us, and I think because we dealt with death in Homicide, I felt, and I think a lot of us felt like, how did we miss that warning sign? Yeah, and that. But I think that's a natural emotion that you go through. But it was a sad day.
Oh,
and
very.
Absolute legend of a human being.
Yeah.
And others, if someone, certain people go, I might have seen that, but he was there. He just made you feel comfortable and safe, and no matter how much you're under the pump or under the pressure, if Steve was there, it was all calm.
Yeah,
he just had that
very
calming effect.
influence. He's actually just found out, because he spent that long over in The Hague. He was on a temporary contract, and there was something to do with his UN contract where he'd been deemed permanent, so they back paid him at a different rate and paid all these kids' school fees, and so he had everything from the outside looking in. Everything was going great.
And as you said, and he was in tidying up his affairs, and that included doing statements for matters that he was involved in,
which is a measure of he didn't want to leave that undone.
Yeah.
So, so that was kind of just after that is when I'd left, because I got promoted outside of the...
And where did you go to then?
Yeah, so I went to the Child Abuse Squad. So that was a position down at Queanbeyan, so going kind of back home to Canberra.
Did they still recognise you as a football legend?
No. Well, see, that's... wasn't a football legend, but maybe we around the barbecue with some of my mates, we always get better as you get older. But no, it was a chance to go home with family there, and also to be a sergeant at State Crime, running a small team.
Tell me what that squad, what the focus of that squad is.
Basically, and coming from Homicide, where it's seen as the pinnacle in terms of the importance the community places on it, and you get all the resources.
Yep.
You don't get everything you want, but you do compared to a lot of other crimes. Then to go to child abuse, where I was kind of astonished at the volume of horrific crimes, and we're talking bulk of those crimes are sexual assaults of kids. And there was myself, and there was about 5 constables.
And there's a pressure associated there because they're ongoing offences too?
Well, that's right. Like the difference, and I spent the majority, probably the second half of my career in child abuse, in that field. And the difference between child abuse and homicide is, one, you've got a victim who lives with that forever, but 2, once someone's dead, they can't be harmed anymore. So, at the end, I'm not meaning to be callous, but that's a reality. Whereas the next job that comes in the door at the Child Abuse Squad, some of these jobs, if you don't respond within hours, they'll be harmed again.
Yeah, a lot of pressure.
It's a lot of pressure. It's a lot of volume, and there's a lot of people working one out doing horrific stuff. Or there was when I was there.
I think the New South Wales Police would recognised the pressure that squad was under, and the numbers have been increased, and it's starting to appreciate the way it's got to be addressed and attacked.
And I think too, it was always seen as statistic-wise in terms of state crime, and I think it was the case when I left, and I can't have seen it changing. the child abuse squad lock up more people than all the other squads combined.
Mm.
Yeah. And
it is high volume, isn't
high
it?
volume, but these are all district court matters, sexual assaults, and I was a bit astonished. And to be honest, I got into that office coming from Homicide, and the first job I read, I'm like, "Come on, team, let's go. We got this job," and they're kind of looking at me like it's just another job, because it took a while to actually realize, well, there's another one of these, and another one, and another one, and
you didn't realise or appreciate the volume of crimes.
volume, because every one I found horrific. But then you have to kind of get to a point where you go, okay, well, we're going to have to prioritise, and that, although it's horrific, it just needs to wait. And yeah, so look, that was, and it's funny too. Like you go to a barbecue and you tell someone what you do, and if you're in a homicide squad or organised crime or drugs or whatever it may be, they kind of lean in and want to hear a story. Yeah, same conversation. What do you do? I'm a detective at child abuse, and they almost you physically back away because they don't want to hear.
Yeah, that's interesting. I haven't thought about it that way, but you're quite right that people can listen to and talk about the homicides, but the sexual assault of kids just scares people away.
Yeah, and look, it's not a subject that people kind of want to know about.
Yeah.
And, I know it came out a lot in the Royal Commission that institutional child abuse, and that got a bit heavy for people, didn't want to hear about that. And so I kind of, and that's probably why I stayed doing it as long as I did, because I actually, the value in it, I think is, I'd almost think that it's more important than homicide investigation, because it's ongoing, and these people have to live with it for the rest of their lives, and the way it's dealt with can impact on how they heal, and it's pretty.
Oh, and you see the impact it has on people's lives, and it's a ripple effect. The victim, and then the victim's family, and it just flows on, doesn't it?
Yeah. So,
how long did you spend in that squad?
Well, all up, probably 10 years. So I kind of went around. Went there for a bit down at Queanbeyan, and then got a job back as coordinator in the child abuse. So you're looking after a number of teams.
Yeah. That was based back at Parramatta?
Back at Parramatta.
Yeah.
So I came back to Sydney, and I did leave for a period and did some training. Around the time my daughter was born, I went to detective training, so the same course we all do to become a detective.
Yeah, and you were one of the instructors.
Instructed on that for a period, and then went back to the child abuse squad, and that's kind of where I ended. But yeah, I'd say in all my service that's had a greater impact on me than anything I've done in homicide, or I think people wouldn't understand that child abuse squad just in New South Wales alone, there's 9,000 jobs a year. There was when I left, getting referred to us. I think that at that time there was about 130 staff. So
it's a lot, and I know people within the squad felt the pressure. And there's another sad story in the same vein as Steve Leach, that someone you worked with as well.
Yeah, well, that's right. Just after I went back into state crime as in coordinator's role, Pat Cleary there was a acting sergeant at Chatswood, did very similar circumstances to Steve, went into the gun room and committed suicide with his firearm. And at that time, you were working in that.
I was at Chatswood as a crime manager, so I responded to that one. So I remember it well. It was literally across the road from our police station where his office was, and another sad situation. Yeah,
and again the ripple effect. I think one of his colleagues who found him, I don't think she's ever returned to the police.
Yeah.
And the thing about that, it's not like a police station. It's a small office.
Close.
They're on their own, so there's no one there with her.
Yeah.
And so she's kind of waiting there while that, and it's.
Yeah, I remember it well. It wouldn't have been, and if she worked with him closely and all that, and found the situation, it's not nice.
No, but yeah, it's. I think it's an area in the police that, and there's a lot of change there in terms of. Jaco's kind of involved in that area, and
Andy Waterman's in there too.
Waterman, Peter Yeomans, people like that.
Good people in there. Yeah.
And there's a lot of really good detectives. Yeah. And I think culturally it's shifting now towards it's getting more desirable to go to, and you're getting a lot better investigators. And,
Well, I think the nature of the crime of child sexual assaults, society understand it more now. Before it was just pushed aside, and it was almost like the police did that years and years ago. Like it was almost too confronting. But now people are aware of what's gone on and all the public inquiries and that. It's made it something that people understand that need to be addressed. But I know it's taken its toll on you. How did it impact on you?
a bit of shame in the whole. Our police is we're a paramilitary organisation. You don't want to. Whilst we might have all these safeguards in place, to actually put your hand up and say you're struggling is pretty hard to do.
Yeah.
And I know it got to the point. I'd had a few physical things that had happened, whereas I'd mentioned, the blurred vision, and and then I started to get these things like night sweats. I couldn't sleep. I still, that's always been an issue for me. Bleeding ulcer. I had this other weird thing that it's called uveitis. It's basically an internal swelling of your eye. Yeah. And I'm going, and you always try to find something physical that's wrong with you. And I went to the ophthalmologist, and he's done every test under the sun. He said, "Look, what do you do? Like, tell me about your work." He said, "Look, I've seen it before. Your work is causing this. If you don't make a change, you can lose your eyesight. Because the swelling in your eye basically starts damaging your optic nerve, and you go blind." And then,
that would be confronting for you. You're a physical bloke. You look after yourself. You're a tough guy. And
it was things like that. And then there's a lot of dark moments where, we spoke about Steve and Pat, and in the child abuse squad in particular area, I was working out of a community services office where I had access to my firearm. There wasn't actually a gun safe. So for a period there, I was 24/7 with me. And, in some darker kind of moments, there's you worry that you're going to go down the same path.
And do something stupid.
Without going into the detail of it. It kind of came to a point for me where I realised that if I don't do something about this, I'm not going to be around. And by this stage, I've got a couple of kids at home and a wife.
Well, utmost respect for you and credit to you that you can acknowledge that and look at that and take control of the situation. So.
Yeah, and I think it got to the point where they need me around. And I did. I went and sought some help myself.
Yeah.
And it still wasn't, and this was still going to work for at least 3 years where I'm undergoing some private stuff. It really got to the point where if I want to be around for my kids and I got to the 21 year mark, and that's enough. I've kind of, and like I said, I'm not claiming to be. There's people that have done a lot worse than me and still doing it, and there's people that, particularly child abuse squad, day to day are still doing that work, and it's hard work, and and it needs to be done.
I understand what you're saying, but I'm looking from an outsider's point of view at what your career is, and you haven't shied away from it. And 21 years is a hell of a long time to be at the sharp end.
Yeah, and I think it was enough that I had to make a choice, and the choice was to be around.
Yeah,
really, that's what it came down to. So I'm now not doing it anymore, but. I look back on the police, and it's been good to me. I've got a family, and again, my wife has been with me my whole career.
Yeah.
Is Mary. She's kind of started to identify. I've always like the deer in the headlights. Got that 1,000-yard stare, never present. And she described it to me the other day. It's like every job kind of a little bit of it sticks to you.
Yeah.
To the point where you almost suffocate with it. And
well, I think something that you told me holds in stark contrast from the life that you live outside the cops and the life in, where you're at that barbecue and you got a call and it was a young child that had been murdered, and you're at the barbecue of your school reunion or whatever.
I was at one of my mates Pete's house, and we're basically there, all my schoolmates around, and they used to they'd relish in the stories of, tell us about what you're doing at work and homicide, and it sounds very sexy and glamorous. And look, I enjoyed my time there, no question, but I remember this distinctly. I was on call and I get a phone call and said, look, boys, I've got to go. And they're like, oh, why do you got to go? You got a job? And they're really interested. And I said, yeah, I got a job. Look, I've got to go. I didn't really want to tell them what the job was, and they kind of pushed me. I said, well, it's a murder and rape of a 4-year-old. And, it's like the music stopped. And they're like, oh. And so that was...
That's that stark contrast
is.
from the world that you live outside the cops and then what you're confronted within the cops.
Well, that's right. It's like your life is this, and that's my life is the, and it's not probably as glamorous as you think. And whilst, and I'm still good mates, which is they've been kind of constant throughout my life. All my mates I went to school with and played footy and that with, and they've all undertaken different paths, but my path just happened to be completely different, and it ends up, it's 20 years of kind of violence and crime, which is a whole different life to general population.
Yeah, you're exposed to things that normal people in society don't get exposed to. And
and it's got to shape who you are.
I think it does. Even people that go through it, they might not even acknowledge it. You've acknowledged the impact it's had on you, and I think that's healthy. What, just changing direction a little bit, what's the skills that you think make a good detective?
Oh, I think you've got to be passionate. You've got to be driven. You've got to be dedicated. It's not a 9-to-5 job. It's if you're going to do it well, you've really got to live it. But it's rewarding. I think in terms of you can get a result and you can help people. I mean, that's the thing you get. Some of the best moments I've had as when you've got that conviction, or you've, even stuff where we've identified and removed a child from a situation where they were at harm, and maybe there's some hope there, and so it is rewarding. And I think to be good at it, you've got to throw yourself at it, and you've got to throw yourself 100%. It's not just a job.
So I think, and sit here, I don't want it to be the mutual respect gang, but the fact that you said passion, because that's the thing that if you're employed, whether it be homicide or child protection, to solve crimes like that, you've got to be passionate about it. It is not a 9-to-5 job.
No.
And I think you can have passion with perspective. I think that's important. But you've got to throw yourself into it. And I dare say that's what made you a good detective, because you did throw yourself into it, but you probably also paid the price because of that.
Well, I think, and I've listened to all the podcasts that you've done, and Jason mentioned that, and when he said he lost that kind of drive in terms of he knew that was the time. Yeah. Because I think if you don't have that, you're not going to be very good at your job, particularly when you got, it's in those sharp, pointy areas of... Yeah, but that's right. It's you get to that point and you go, okay, enough's enough. And I know my career finished in a different way than I expected it to finish, but I know there were times where I was questioning, can I do this anymore? Do I want to do this anymore? And I think that's because you are invested in the job. Another, and because you've been involved in detective training, I think this is important in the type of areas you've worked. Empathy is something good. You've had your relationships with your informants because you show them empathy, and also the way that you deal with the crooks and that. I think that's an important quality. What do you say about that? Yeah, well, I think if you just approach it and this is what recruiting informants was, treat them how you'd want to be treated. I mean, yes, they may have. I mean, the only part that's very difficult to show empathy is interviewing a pedophile. Yeah. But however, you can dig into that to go, the best way for this victim to not have to give evidence is to me to get something out of this, and that might be to not show my disgust and disdain for this guy and get him to talk by trying to bury what I'm actually truly thinking.
Yeah, I'm sitting here. I know exactly where you're coming from there, and I've sat opposite pedophiles, and the whole thing is not to judge, and you've got to put that across, because you're doing a disservice to the victims if you sit there and be a tough guy and you're just a pedophile. Right. You've got to sit there, listen to them, let them tell their story, and you walk out and you feel. I feel when I walk out of an interview room with a pedophile like that, I feel slightly dirty,
grubby.
Yeah.
I remember an interview I did with a guy down at Queanbeyan where he just made full and frank admissions, which is very rare, to this young girl, and in the end I asked the question why. why did you do it? And his response was, I like all women. I like, and I'm like white knuckled under the thing, grabbing hold of the table.
Yeah.
This wasn't a woman; it was an 8-year-old child.
Yeah,
And in the end, he realised that the table. I'd turned on him at that point. I got what I needed.
Yeah.
But I started to feel grubby in that interview room, and really had to contain. This isn't. You're not talking about a woman. You're talking about an 8-year-old child. This isn't, and that's what the justification in his mind.
Yeah, I know what you're saying. I interviewed a murdering pedophile, and he was saying that the 10-year-old victim was enjoying it, and this is a person that's got a knife to her throat, and saying that, and I drew the line a little bit there, and sort of bit back a bit, but it does. There was one pedophile that I interviewed that had a Ned Kelly type beard, and I couldn't stand anyone with a beard for a long time. After that, everyone I saw with a beard like a Ned Kelly type beard, I thought pedophile, and that's sort of what you take away from it, I think, and you do walk away feeling a little bit dirty. Yeah. So,
but even as I said about empathy, like even with I noticed after having had kids myself and interviewing people around the shaken baby stuff, and you were a better interviewer because you knew the trigger points where something, and you're talking to people who are drug dependent, they're struggling in a lot of ways, but and when you got a baby yourself, when geez, you just got to walk out of the room.
Yeah.
But you know where the trigger points might be, and you become better interviewer for having that empathy to go, well, so what was leading up to it, and trying to get.
If you take that feeling of judgment away from the interview room, they're more likely to talk about it.
Yeah.
So,
but and I think at the end of the day, that's what I always said on the detectives course when you talk about the interviewing technique. It's not your story; it's their story. And it doesn't matter what story they're giving you. Let them talk. It's not about the old school way of
this is what I want them to say.
I'll write down 200 questions. All right. Even if you know they're lying, tell me more. And that's what we always. And that's just, I guess, you get them to believe that. I'm listening to you, and I believe your story, whether it's rubbish or not. Let them go, and that kind of stuff. So. That was good being part of that detective training.
I think I always found it rewarding when I was lecturing down there or doing something to the detectives course or homicide course to put back in your knowledge, because we're all trained by people more experienced and pass that it's almost like passing a lineage along. But with your police career, you'd do it all over again. Yeah.
I would. And I think even though it's probably taken a toll on me, I think I worked out up until recent birthdays. I spent half my life on the planet, being a cop. So it really does shape who you are. But I kind of look back and I believe it was worthwhile, and it kind of and I'd encourage. But it is a good job. It's an occupation
that's what I tell people. They talk about policing. There's so many different areas you can go into too. It's like a smorgasbord of opportunities. So I see it as a positive. Yeah. I've got to wrap it up, but there's a couple of things I just want to cover off on. When are you going to get your old man to come on the podcast?
Yeah. I'm still working on him. I'll play him this one, but he's got a really good story.
He has got a story, and I've heard everyone's stories in policing, and when I spoke to him and I heard his story, that just blew me away. That's an amazing story. So please work him hard.
Yeah, I will. Yeah, okay. Sure.
A couple of other things. When you came to Homicide, that there was a lot of debate in the office whether you're better looking than Joe Casser. Joe Casser's an assistant commissioner, and I think Mick Fitzgerald was the one that was starting the debate. He was saying, I think Mark Zjedlar is better looking than Joe Casser. Can you just settle that for us?
Well, I was younger. Well, I used to get that with Paul Augley's. And,
you're up against him too.
Yeah, but no, I don't know. Can't really answer that.
You can't? Or you're not prepared to?
Not prepared. He's a good-looking man, Joe Casso.
He's a good-looking rooster. I think that's what Fitzy said. But the Fitzy was always jealous, and I shouldn't be talking about him because is he assistant or deputy commissioner? I think he's assistant commissioner. And
I heard him on the radio the other day. He's up there.
He was always jealous about you good-looking young blokes in Homicide. So I hope he's listening to this. But look, Mark, thanks so much for coming along. I found it fascinating. I look at your career, and I think 21 years. It should have spanned 40 years. The amount of work that you've done, the things that you've seen, and full credit to you. And you're clearly getting on with your life. There is life outside the cops, and I really appreciate it. So thanks very much.
There's a lot coming from you. Thank you.
Cheers. As you can see, Mark is an impressive fellow. I think it's important that the public get to hear someone like Mark talking with such honesty and clarity about life in the cops. When you go into policing like Mark and operate at the sharp end, it's going to change you. I should also make the point, if you are struggling, whether you're a cop or not, you should always reach out for help. Hope you've enjoyed this episode of I Catch Killers. See you next time. I Catch Killers is published by True Crime Australia, produced by Claire Harvey from the Sunday Telegraph and Dylan Adams at Made in Katana. I'm now an investigative journalist at News Corp Australia, attached to the Sunday Telegraph. If you like the podcast, please subscribe to our newspapers.